My name is Emily Sharp, and last year I stood up at my birthday dinner, looked my father dead in the eye, and said, "You and Mom can pay for your own $6,000 feast. You weren't even invited." Then I slid the bill across the table, walked out of Vesuvio's in heels and dignity, and left them staring at their empty wine glasses while half the family followed me. Where are you watching from? Tell me in the comments. And if you've ever had a birthday go sideways thanks to family drama, you're definitely going to feel this one. The waiter had just set down our first round of Prosecco when my father, Raymond Sharp, dropped the mood like a stone in a wine glass. "Just so you know, we didn't bring gifts. We're broke," he said with a chuckle, like it was some kind of joke. Except nobody laughed. I held my champagne flute a little tighter and turned to him, keeping my smile steady. "I invited you for your company, not your presence." I said it sweetly, with just enough warmth to keep the table from freezing over, but my fingertips were already numb from how hard I was gripping the stem of my glass. My mother, Darlene, adjusted her silk scarf like she hadn't heard the tension in his voice, or maybe she had and just didn't care. My younger sister Ashley looked up from her phone, barely masking a smirk, and muttered, "Classic Dad." This wasn't how I'd pictured it. I'd made reservations at Vesuvio's, my favorite little upscale Italian place on the edge of town. White tablecloths, live piano, the kind of place where the waiters don't write down your order and the portions are smaller than the price tags. I just wanted one night, one birthday where things felt grown-up, elegant, simple. The reservation was originally for 8. Close family only. My parents, Ashley, my cousins Lee and Jordan, and my Aunt Marie. A small, intimate dinner. But as the hostess pulled over 2 more chairs and gestured to the waiter to grab another set of wine glasses, I realized someone had changed the plan without telling me. Again. The waiter cleared his throat delicately beside me. "Miss Sharp, will the party be expanding further this evening?" His eyes drifted to the door where 2 more relatives I hadn't seen in months were walking in with wide grins and a balloon bouquet. I forced a gracious smile and nodded. "We might need a few more chairs." Dad leaned back in his seat like he was king of the table. "Told you it'd be a big one. Family loves a good meal when they're not footing the bill." My stomach nodded, but I didn't flinch. I reached for the bread basket. "So glad you all could make it," I said brightly to Lee and Jordan across the table, ignoring the way my father had just announced my financial role like I was an open wallet. Ashley giggled and whispered something to my mom, who smirked in response. I caught it in my peripheral vision. In that look before. It's the look they give each other when they're amused that I've taken the bait again. Hosting, paying, planning, playing the part of the successful one. Funny how success becomes a family resource once it's convenient. "Dad," I said softly, keeping my eyes on the menu. "Can we not talk about money tonight?" He shrugged, tearing into a piece of bread. "Just being honest. Transparency's healthy in families." I nodded slowly. "Then let's all be transparent about our intentions, shall we?" He raised a brow. "What's that supposed to mean?" Before I could answer, the waiter returned to take our orders. I clamped my jaw shut and smiled again, this time tighter. "Ladies first," the waiter said, pen poised. I ordered the mushroom risotto and a glass of Chianti. Ashley ordered the most expensive pasta dish without looking up from her phone. Dad asked, "What's the most tender steak you got?" Like he was at a dive bar. And Mom insisted she needed a second appetizer to balance the acidity. I took a long sip of my wine. The food hadn't even arrived and I was already exhausted. Across the table, Lee gave me a sympathetic glance, mouthing, "You okay?" I nodded. It's my birthday. I was supposed to feel celebrated, not cornered. And yet here I was again, back in my usual role. The adult, the host, the one who absorbs the barbs and pays the bill. I exhaled slowly and glanced around the table, committing their faces to memory. Because next year, things were going to look very different. I just hadn't realized yet how different tonight would become. The bread baskets were refilled. Wine glasses clinked. Laughter began to swell like a tide trying to wash away the rocky start. And I was trying to let it. Maybe if I just let the comments roll off, I could still salvage the night. I wanted warmth. Connection, something close to love. Maybe a version of it would show up eventually. But as I glanced around the long table, something caught in my throat. There were more people now. A lot more. The 2 cousins I'd waved at earlier were now joined by their spouses and kids. Uncle Mitch was somehow seated at the far end, gesturing wildly with a wine glass, telling a story only he found funny. Behind him, Aunt Trish, who I hadn't seen since she accused me of being too uppity at my own graduation party, was laughing at something my father said. And more were still arriving. A host of relatives I hadn't invited, hadn't heard from in years, and certainly hadn't expected to see, were now filling every available seat in Vesuvio's private room. I could hear the hostess apologizing to another reservation about the noise, while my family spilled across tables like a wedding party gone rogue. I leaned toward my mother, who was dabbing her lipstick delicately after finishing her appetizer. "Mom, what is going on? Who invited everyone?" She looked at me like I'd asked why the sun shines. "Oh, honey," she said with a little laugh, "surprise, I told everyone. You know how people love to celebrate. The more the merrier, right? Right. I stared at her, waiting for the punchline or even an ounce of embarrassment, but there was none. She took a sip of her white wine and smiled. "You always throw such nice events. Everyone wanted to be part of it. Everyone but me." I inhaled sharply but kept my voice even. "Mom, this was supposed to be a small dinner, you knew that." She shrugged like I was being fussy. "They were all thrilled to come. Besides, you already had the room booked and I figured we'd just spread out a bit." Spread out? It looked like a family reunion. Only I wasn't told I was hosting it. I looked down at the menu, pretending to reread it so she wouldn't see the flush creeping up my neck. My voice, when it came, was smooth, too smooth. "I'm happy they came." My jaw ached from the effort of smiling. "See," she said, brushing imaginary lint from my sleeve. "I knew you'd be gracious." Gracious. That's the word they always throw at me like confetti. As if being gracious is my only job in this family. The plates started arriving, steaming and fragrant. My risotto looked perfect, but I barely touched it. The conversations picked up in volume. A toddler began wailing in the far corner. A waiter nearly tripped trying to carry 3 plates between chairs. The quiet elegance of Vesuvio's had been completely drowned out by the chatter of relatives I barely knew and hadn't seen fit to include. Ashley, oblivious to the rising chaos, snapped a selfie and said, "Mom, can you scoot in? I need a birthday photo for Instagram." Without missing a beat, my mother leaned in and smiled like she was hosting the queen. I leaned back in my seat and let the noise swirl around me. My hand rested on the linen napkin in my lap, fingers twitching. I thought I'd planned for everything. Chose the guest list carefully, booked the private room, prepaid the wine service. But I forgot the one variable I never could control, them. And now I was stuck here with 30 people I hadn't invited, paying for a party I hadn't planned and watching the spotlight shift away from me on the one night I allowed myself to want it. I could feel it already, that tiny voice in the back of my mind. "They don't see you, Emily. They see what they can take from you." Again. But I swallowed it down. Not yet, not tonight. I reached for my glass and raised it again, to surviving the ambush with poise because that's what they expect from the gracious one. A small wooden box was the first gift placed in my lap. "I carved it myself," Uncle Mitch said a little too loudly, setting it down as if it were something precious. "Keepsakes, recipes, secrets, whatever you want. Thought you'd like something solid, real wood, none of that plastic junk." I blinked, then smiled politely. "Thanks, Uncle Mitch, that's thoughtful." He patted my shoulder and turned to flag down another wine refill, clearly proud of his contribution. The box was actually beautiful, smooth cherry wood, carved edges, a lid that slid back with a quiet click. Inside was a note, "To Emily, who always remembers everyone else." From one who noticed. That part I hadn't expected. Then came a wrapped bundle from Aunt Trish, which I opened cautiously, bracing for another passive-aggressive jab dressed as a compliment. But it was a book, Women Who Run with the Wolves. Inside, she'd written, "For the one in our family who walks her own path. Keep going." I stared at the inscription a moment longer than I should have, unsure how to receive it. Was this sincere? "Hope you don't already have it," she said gently, almost sheepishly. "It helped me once. Might help you, too." I nodded slowly. "I've heard of it, thank you." A warmth began to creep through the fog of irritation that had wrapped itself around me. Across the table, little Ellie, Cousin Lee's daughter, handed me a homemade card with glittered hearts and a stick-figure family where my hair was 3 feet tall and pink. "Happy birthday, Emily," it said. I laughed, really laughed, for the first time that evening. "I love it, sweetheart, especially the hair." Lee leaned over then, arms open for a hug. "Thanks for having us, Em," she said warmly, pressing her cheek to mine. "I know we weren't officially invited, but Mom said your mom called and, well, we didn't want to miss it." There was no malice in her voice, no entitlement, just love. I'm glad you came, I whispered back, and to my surprise, I meant it. Suddenly, the room didn't feel quite so suffocating. The laughter didn't grate as much. The sound of clinking glasses, of cousins catching up and kids sneaking bites of tiramisu early, it all felt less like an invasion and more like a reclaiming. If I was going to be the host of this ambush, I'd do it on my own terms, with grace, with grit. I stood for a moment to thank the waiter quietly. He looked stressed but kind. I asked him to bring an extra dessert for the kids. Then I walked around the table, making my way to each small group, checking in, sharing quick hugs, short jokes, even a few memories. You look incredible, Emily, my cousin Renee said, sipping her wine. Like something out of a magazine, this place is gorgeous. I can't believe you pulled this off. Oh, don't give me all the credit, I said lightly, though something in me twisted at the lie. You didn't plan this, the voice inside said. You didn't invite half of them, and you're footing the bill. Still, I smiled. I just wanted something cozy, intimate, Renee laughed. This is intimate by our standards. Maybe she was right. Maybe I'd aimed too high, or maybe I was just tired of aiming alone. By the time the second course arrived, I had a small pile of meaningful gifts beside my chair, a framed photo of me and Lee from childhood, a cookbook with sticky notes already marking favorite pages, a candle someone had made from beeswax and lavender. Not expensive things, but thoughtful things. The kind of gifts you only get from people who have actually seen you. I caught Ashley's eye across the table. She was scrolling again, unmoved by the little moments unfolding around her. She hadn't brought a gift, she never did, and didn't seem to notice the shift happening. Or maybe she didn't care. Mom was laughing too loudly at something Dad said about his golf buddies, completely oblivious. But others, they were showing up in their own small ways. For me, not for the free dinner. And that mattered. It didn't erase the fact that I hadn't asked for the circus, but it softened the sting. I refilled my wine glass, leaned back, and let myself breathe for the first time that night. I wasn't invisible. I wasn't alone. Not entirely. The chicken marsala had just been cleared when I spotted the hostess weaving through the crowded dining room again, this time with someone trailing behind her in jeans, boots, and a deep blue pea coat dusted with snow. Rachel. My breath caught. Rachel Lynn Abbott, my best friend since age 6, the girl who once punched a kid in the 3rd grade for calling my teeth weird, was here. Her hair was wind-tangled, her scarf mismatched, and she carried a grocery bouquet of daisies and sunflowers, wrapped in crinkly plastic that didn't match the elegance of Vesuvio's, and yet somehow made more sense than anything else in the room. She scanned the tables, and when her eyes locked with mine, she lit up. "Hey, birthday girl," she called. Heads turned. Conversations paused, and I stood up without thinking, knocking my cloth napkin to the floor in my rush to meet her halfway. "Rachel," I gasped, pulling her into the kind of hug you forget you need until it's happening. "I tried to be sneaky," she murmured into my shoulder, "but your mom told me where to find you, said it was a full house." Didn't realize she meant full circus. I laughed, an actual, breath-leaving, shoulder-shaking laugh. "You have no idea how needed this was." She leaned back and gave me a once-over, eyes narrowed in mock diagnosis. "You look like you're surviving a family ambush with surprising elegance. Is this your war face or your I'm about to lose it in the bathroom face?" Little of both. I led her to the one empty chair at my end of the table, someone must have left to chase their toddler, and pulled it beside me like it had been waiting for her all along. She handed me the flowers, then pulled a wrapped gift from her purse, a soft, lumpy package that already made my heart swell. "This is stupid, but you'll get it." I tore open the paper to reveal a sweatshirt in our high school colors. Across the front, in bold block letters, it read, "I peaked AT Drama Club." I snorted so loudly that the table actually turned to look. "I had it custom made," Rachel said with faux pride. "As if there's one person who can turn a birthday party into a 3-act play, it's you." "You're a menace," I said, clutching the sweatshirt to my chest. "I'm your menace," she replied, popping a breadstick into her mouth. My mother gave her a tight smile from across the table. "So glad you could join, Rachel. It's gotten lively." Rachel blinked slowly. I noticed, almost didn't make it in. The hostess said it's the biggest party they've had since New Year's." Ashley chimed in. "Well, that's Emily for you. Always overdoing it." Rachel tilted her head, smiling sweetly. "Seems more like something that got overdone for her." Ashley went quiet. "I didn't." "Ratch," I said, gripping her arm under the table, "don't start. Too late, I've already made my observations." She turned back to me and lowered her voice. You okay? I hesitated, then nodded. Getting there. Good. She leaned back in her chair, content. Then let me just be the friend who drinks your wine, judges your relatives, and hands you tissues when it all crashes down. Perfect, I whispered. I needed backup. The dessert menus were being passed around now. Someone called out a toast. My mother was reliving the story of my birth, embellishing again about how I came out smiling, like she already knew how to charm a room. But I tuned it all out, because Rachel was here. And somehow, that made all the difference. The lights dimmed just slightly, and from the far end of the room, a parade of waitstaff began weaving through the tables with something glowing at the center, a towering tiramisu cake, candles flickering atop like tiny golden warnings. Here it comes, someone shouted, and a cheer went up. 30 voices, some tipsy, some off-key, a few startlingly loud, broke into a jumbled, chaotic rendition of Happy Birthday. I stood at the head of the table, surrounded by the glow of camera flashes and the too close proximity of relatives who only knew me through holiday cards and forwarded chain emails. Rachel, now sitting beside me like an anchor, whispered, "Smile like you're not plotting a quiet escape through the bathroom window." I smiled. Wide, radiant, picture-perfect. The kind I've been trained to wear since childhood birthday parties with balloon arches and too many kids I didn't know. Make a wish, sweetheart, my mom cooed from across the table, raising her phone for another angle. Let's see that beautiful sharp grin. I leaned forward and closed my eyes, letting the warm candlelight brush my face. Inside, I made a wish, but not the kind anyone at that table could imagine. Then I blew them out in one breath. Applause exploded. Plates clinked. And just like that, the dessert forks appeared and the cake was being carved with surgical precision by the waiter, who looked one emotional outburst away from quitting. To my left, my cousin Jordan clapped me on the shoulder. 33 never looked better. What's your secret? Blackmail, Botox, black magic. Mostly carbs, I deadpanned. And anxiety, he laughed. Well, whatever it is, keep doing it. This whole night, amazing. I nodded, said thank you for the 20th time that evening, and took my seat again. The cake made its rounds. The volume spiked again. I spotted Ashley doing a video selfie with her slice, pouting like it was a product ad. Then I heard the clink. It wasn't loud, but sharp. The distinct sound of someone tapping a fork against a wine glass to make an announcement. My mother stood. She always did love a captive audience. I just want to say a few words, she began, already holding up her Chardonnay like it was a microphone. I mean, how could I not? Look at this room. Everyone turned toward her. She beamed at the attention. Emily, she said, gesturing to me, you've outdone yourself, again. She paused for dramatic effect, waiting for the second wave of guests who'd missed her first compliment. You always know how to throw a perfect party. Everything about tonight has been magical, don't you all think? Crowd murmured in agreement, like obedient wedding guests. My smile stayed frozen. Rachel leaned close again. Is she seriously congratulating you on a party she hijacked? Oh, just wait, I murmured. My mother continued. It's no surprise, of course. Emily's always been the planner, the one who makes sure everything goes smoothly. Ever since she was little, always organizing, always thinking ahead. Some of us, here she gave a playful glance at Ashley, prefer to go with the flow, but not Emily. She's our cruise director, our anchor, She searched for the word, our compass. I wanted to laugh or cry or leave. Instead, I raised my glass. Thanks, Mom, I said, tone even. She winked, proud of her speech, proud of the illusion she'd just spun in front of a room full of people who didn't know the whole story. I sipped my wine and smiled for the 5th photo in 3 minutes. But behind my smile, I was already rewinding every phrase she'd said. Perfect party, planner, cruise director, each one laced with the same old subtext. We don't appreciate you, but we'll sure take credit for what you create. Rachel slid me a fresh fork for the cake and said quietly, I've seen hostage videos with less pressure. I nearly choked on my bite. The tiramisu was excellent. The manipulation, not so much. I dabbed the corner of my mouth with my napkin and scanned the table again, eyes sharp now. Watching, counting, measuring. The night was winding down, but I could feel something tightening inside me. This wasn't over, not by a long shot. The last flicker of candlelight had melted into frosting. Most of the guests were leaning back in their chairs, sluggish and blissfully full, while others gathered for photos near the Vesuvio's arched mural wall, laughing as someone tried to rally a group shot before the toddlers melted down. I stayed seated, fork idle beside a half-eaten sliver of cake, Rachel scrolling through her phone beside me, both of us riding the edge of polite exhaustion. Then the waiter returned. Not the one who'd been managing our table all evening, but the manager, gray vest, clipboard, and a tight smile that said he'd seen things tonight he wouldn't soon forget. He stepped quietly behind me, bent just enough that only I could hear. "Miss Sharp," he murmured, slipping a small black folder onto the corner of the table. "The bill when you're ready." I blinked. My throat went dry. "Oh," I said, as if I hadn't forgotten this was coming. "Thanks." He nodded and backed away with the discretion of someone who'd handled worse. I opened the folder. $7,000, not 6,900 and something, not $6,842.31. No, just $7,000. The exact, round brutality of it made my vision blur. My hand froze on the leather edge of the folder, fingers tightening until my knuckles went pale. I could feel Rachel watching me before she even spoke. "What's wrong?" I didn't answer right away, because my brain was still catching up, running down a mental checklist of what I had pre-approved. The wine service, yes. The private room, yes. An appetizer per guest, that was a maybe, but 30 guests, 30, I had budgeted for 8. "Emily," Rachel said again, more alert now. I lowered the bill to the table, face down. "It's nothing." She raised an eyebrow. "It's not nothing. Your face just did that thing where it looks like you might launch a murder-suicide with a dessert spoon." I swallowed hard, then slowly reached for my phone. "I need to step out for a sec." I stood carefully, like I didn't want the weight of my fury to tip over the table. Outside the private room, I slipped into the corridor near the restrooms and leaned against the wall, breathing in the heavy scent of espresso and garlic. My hands were trembling. I typed quickly. "Rachel. Emergency. Can you bring cash ASAP? Just trust me." Before I could overthink it, I hit send and stared at the message, the bile rising in my throat. I wasn't going to ask my family. I already knew the answer. They'd all come here assuming I would cover it, that I should. I exhaled, pressed my hands flat against the wall to ground myself, and then, after another deep breath, walked back to the table with the same serene smile I'd worn all evening. No one noticed. No one even looked up. My mom was in deep conversation about manifestation journaling, and Ashley was showing someone her recent Cabo photos. My father was flagging down a waiter for just one more pour of the Barolo, and I could hear someone joke about how Emily really knows how to host a party. I slid back into my seat and reached for my water glass, Rachel watching me with narrowed eyes. She leaned in and whispered, "7." I didn't ask how she knew. I just nodded. She muttered, "We're burning this place down after dessert." I smiled faintly. "Just get the gas can ready." But inside, my stomach was burning, because it wasn't just the number. It was the audacity, the assumption, that of course Emily will handle it. Of course Emily can absorb the cost. Of course Emily, the successful one, the gracious one, the provider, won't say a word. My gaze drifted to my parents, still laughing like royalty holding court. And I made a silent promise to myself right there. They wouldn't get away with it, not this time. The clink of silverware against dessert plates echoed like tiny taunts as I made my way back toward the table. I moved slowly, calculating every step. Chin high, shoulders squared. Smile soft enough to avoid suspicion. Inside, I was a storm system trapped in skin. Rachel had her phone in her lap, already texting back on it. "Be cool. 10 minutes. I didn't feel cool. I felt like my nerves had been stretched taut across 7,000 invisible strings, each one ready to snap. As I approached, my mother's laugh rang out, sharp, sweet, and polished for an audience. "Well, darling," she said with a coy glance in my direction, "cash or card?" It was loud, too loud. A few heads turned from neighboring tables. One couple near the door actually paused mid-conversation to look our way. I stopped just short of my chair and smiled like I was amused. Like it was a game. Like I wasn't dying inside. I glanced down at the untouched black folder, still resting on the table like a ticking bomb no one else could hear. Then I spoke, soft but clear. "Actually, I'd like to split the check." For a moment there was silence, not just at our table. The entire room hushed, like someone had pulled the air out of the bistro and vacuum-sealed it in tension. My mother blinked. "I'm sorry." My father choked slightly on his wine. Ashley didn't even pretend to hide her eye roll. I repeated, keeping my voice smooth. "Let's split the check. A party this size, it only seems fair." Mom let out a stunned little laugh, the kind people do when they're buying time. Emily, sweetheart, that's not how birthdays work. No, I said gently. That's not how surprise, unpaid, 30-person ambush birthdays work. That got Rachel's attention. I saw her eyes flicker alert like a guard dog hearing trouble through the door. Dad leaned in, confused. You invited everyone, didn't you? I kept my gaze on him. No, Dad, I invited 8. You and Mom took the liberty of expanding that list to 32. Mom looked uncomfortable for the first time all night. I was just trying to make it special. And it was, I said quickly, cutting her off before the guilt act could begin. But now we're talking about logistics and fairness. You're making a scene, Ashley muttered into her wineglass. No, I said calmly. I'm making a request. Rachel cleared her throat lightly, chiming in like she was reading my mind. It's actually pretty common these days to split big checks, especially when there wasn't a prefix or one host. Bless her, I didn't even have to nudge. Dad's face twisted. This is absurd, it's your birthday. And it's your bar tab that's half the receipt, I replied, smiling so tightly my teeth ached. A hush fell over the table again. Cousin Lee's fork paused halfway to her mouth. Aunt Tricia's husband looked visibly uncomfortable. I took my seat with composure, folding my napkin in my lap like I hadn't just dropped a match into a powder keg. Of course, I added, glancing around, I'll cover the guests I personally invited. But the rest, well, since this became a family-wide affair, maybe the family can share the responsibility. It was quiet again, but this time, it was a loaded quiet. The kind where everyone pretends to chew, to sip, to look at their phones, anything but engage. Ashley scoffed and leaned back in her chair. God, Emily, you really can't help yourself, can you? My jaw clenched. Can't help asking for basic respect, apparently not. My mother leaned toward me, voice low and sharp. You're embarrassing yourself. Rachel chuckled quietly beside me, not bothering to hide it. Looks to me like she's finally standing up for herself. Then, as if on cue, our waiter returned, cautiously placing extra pens and bill copies at the edge of the table. Will we be splitting this evenly? He asked carefully, or itemized? I looked him dead in the eye. Itemized, please. The tension cracked, not from me but from across the table. Cousin Lee, God bless her, nodded slowly. Actually, that's fair. Then someone else spoke up. Yeah, we're happy to cover our share. I heard murmurs of agreement, not overwhelming, but enough. Enough to know I wasn't crazy. Enough to know I wasn't alone. Mom looked shell-shocked. Dad was stiff in his seat. Ashley was already composing some passive-aggressive caption for Instagram, no doubt. But me, I took a sip of my wine. And waited. Rachel had slipped away quietly after my message, returning 20 minutes later with her crossbody bag slung across her chest and a focused look that made her resemble a woman about to settle a hostage negotiation. She handed me a sealed white envelope under the table without a word. I gave her a quick squeeze of the hand. I didn't have to ask if it was enough, it would be. Rachel had always known how to show up. The waiter returned just moments later, this time armed with a printed breakdown of the bill, a notepad, and what looked like a practiced expression of neutrality. Apologies for the delay, he said quietly, angling the papers toward me like we were trading secrets. We've gone ahead and organized by table segments. Here's what we have so far. He pointed to a column. Guests who indicated they were covering their share totaled approximately $1,000. I nodded slowly. Okay, that made sense. A few of the cousins had offered to pay after I opened the conversation. They were good people. They hadn't asked for a party. They hadn't expected me to bankroll their evening. Then he pointed to the next column. This subtotal, he said, tapping a bold figure, represents what's left from the original group, Mr. and Mrs. Sharp, Miss Ashley Sharp and their guests. 6,000. My head turned sharply, heart thudding. 6,000, I repeated too loud. Rachel's hand froze on her wine glass. I leaned in, needing to be sure. That's just for my parents and sister, the waiter hesitated. That's what we've calculated, yes. I stared down at the number, letting the shape of it burn into my vision. My mouth was suddenly dry. Rachel whispered, please tell me this is a mistake. It wasn't, I knew it wasn't. I slowly turned to face the 3 people who had brought me into this world and apparently brought the bistro into financial jeopardy. 6,000, I said again, quieter now but with the weight of a boulder. My mother shifted uncomfortably in her seat, dabbing the corner of her mouth with her napkin as if this were a particularly spicy appetizer, not a financial ambush. Ashley looked bored. She was already texting. My father sighed heavily, not even looking up. We assumed you'd cover it. My stomach dropped. Why, I asked, voice steady, would you assume that? He looked at me now, slightly defensive. It's your birthday, I blinked. So you brought extra guests, you ordered top-shelf wine, you had seconds, you toasted me as the perfect host, and you did all that with no intention of paying. We didn't think it'd be that much, my mother said, frowning as if the restaurant had deceived her. They didn't even list prices clearly. They did, Rachel muttered. You just didn't care. My hands were shaking now, but not from fear, not even from shame, from something else entirely. The quiet kind of rage that blooms when a truth you always suspected finally arrives in full color. You used me, I said, almost to myself. Ashley finally looked up from her phone. God, you're being so dramatic. I turned to her. You ordered 2 entrees for Instagram. And they looked amazing, she said, raising an eyebrow. You let them do this, I said to no one and everyone. You watched me plan this whole night, smiling at me like I was so generous, and you let me walk straight into it, Dad scoffed. We thought you'd be happy to treat your family. Rachel stood abruptly, placing both palms on the table. No, you thought she'd be too polite to say no. The room had gone still again. Not just our table. I could feel eyes on us from across the dining room. My cousin Lee slowly leaned in, whispering, Did they really expect you to pay $6,000? I nodded. The word rippled quietly across the table, 6,000. 6,000. Whispers, exchanged glances, disbelief growing like frost. And yet, none of the people responsible looked even remotely ashamed. I looked at my parents, at the people I had once adored, defended, idolized, and I realized with a clarity so sharp it nearly split me open. They didn't love me in the way I had always hoped. They just loved what I provided. And I had provided, for years, my time, my money, my silence, my grace. But tonight I was out, of money, of patience, of illusions. I stood up, slowly, quietly, like rising wasn't just emotion, but a decision. A breaking of spellwork that had kept me tethered to a script I didn't write. I'll cover the 1,000, I said, loud enough for the whole table to hear. That's for the people I invited, for the dinner I planned. You could hear a fork clatter somewhere near the middle of the table, then nothing. The rest, I continued, letting my gaze settle on my parents, those who arrived without an invitation or a gift and ordered whatever they pleased can pay for their own indulgences. Rachel exhaled beside me like she'd been holding her breath the whole night. My father's jaw clenched. My mother let out a small, nervous laugh like she thought I was bluffing, but I didn't blink. I mean it, I said. Split it however you want, but it's not all mine. I turned to the waiter, whose eyes widened just slightly. You can let the room know. He nodded like a man being handed the wheel of a ship mid-storm. Yes, ma'am. Then the murmurs began. Aunt Trish, surprisingly, whispered good for her. Lee bit her lip, trying not to smile. One uncle leaned toward another and muttered, Did she just say she's not paying for us? And a couple of second cousins were already digging through their wallets, whispering things like, Well, she's right. It spread like wildfire, not outrage but realization. Rachel stood beside me, sliding her coat back on like we were wrapping up a business deal. You want me to walk with you? I shook my head. Not yet. I turned back toward the center of the table, where Ashley still sat with her phone in hand. You're not exempt, I said gently. You drank the champagne and brought nothing but sarcasm. You can contribute too. Ashley looked up, stunned. Are you kidding me? No, I replied. But feel free to use that line in your next Instagram story. And then, to everyone else, thank you for coming, especially those who showed up with kindness and nothing to gain. I gave one small nod of thanks, not to the room, but to the few who had shown me quiet support, the ones who hadn't tried to take more than I offered. Then I reached for my coat, slipped one arm through, then the other, as Rachel held it steady. I adjusted the strap of my bag across my shoulder. And just like that, I began to gather my things, not in haste, but in peace. Because walking away wasn't an escape, it was a declaration. I had barely taken 3 steps when my mother's voice sliced through the murmurs like a blade. You ungrateful brat. The room went dead quiet. Every fork dropped, every glass froze midair. Even the music from the bistro's main room seemed to dull, as if the restaurant itself was holding its breath. I turned halfway, still holding my coat over one arm, but I didn't speak. You humiliate us in front of the entire family, she snapped, eyes flashing. After everything we did for you, this is how you repay us. Rachel took a step forward, but I gently caught her wrist. No, let me. You mean everything you took from me? I asked, my voice still calm. The people you invited without telling me. The thousands of dollars you assumed I'd just hand over, that everything. Dad slammed his napkin down on the table. This is nonsense. It's your birthday. You're supposed to treat your family. No, I interrupted sharply. I'm not supposed to bankrupt myself for a party I didn't even plan. You turned this night into a performance. You made it about you. Ashley groaned dramatically, folding her arms. This is so embarrassing. Can you just stop making it worse? Worse. I almost laughed. As if I had pulled a stunt. As if this was some childish tantrum and not the first time in my entire adult life I had refused to silently swallow disrespect. I'm not making it worse, I said, now turning fully toward the table. I'm making it honest. Across the room, Lee stood. Her daughter Ellie was already tugging at her coat sleeve. You don't have to take this, Em, Lee said, her voice soft but clear. You didn't do anything wrong. That's when it started, the shift. It wasn't loud. It wasn't dramatic, but it was powerful. One by one, guests began quietly standing. Some gathered coats. Others hugged goodbye. A few simply placed cash or cards next to their plates and turned to follow the exit signs. Uncle Mitch gave me a thumbs up on his way past. Takes guts, kid. Aunt Trish offered a curt nod. You did what most wouldn't. Ashley scowled at the procession. Oh my God, are you all serious? Lee came last, pulling me into a hug. That was badass, she whispered into my ear. About time someone said it. Rachel stepped beside me as we headed toward the door, slipping her arm through mine. I glanced once, just once, back at the table. My mother's face was pale with fury. My father looked stunned, like someone had just told him the bank was closed forever. Ashley was still typing angrily on her phone, probably already rewriting the narrative. But I didn't say goodbye, because this wasn't goodbye. This was release. I pushed open the heavy wooden door to Vesuvio's, stepping out into the crisp night air. Cold kissed my cheeks, fresh and startling after the stuffy heat of that room. The small crowd that had followed me out lingered for a moment. Hugs, quick exchanges, quiet knowing smiles, then they dispersed, leaving just me and Rachel under the glowing awning. She pulled out her keys. You want a ride? I shook my head. I think I want to walk a little. She paused. You good? I'm getting there. She handed me the envelope again, this time placing it firmly in my palm. You'll sort the rest later. For now, go be free. And then with a final hug, she got in her car and drove off, taillights bleeding into the streetlight glow. I stood there for a moment longer, letting the night wrap around me like a velvet robe. Behind me, noise, wine, pretense. Ahead of me, cold air, clear streets, and something close to peace. I chose forward. By the time I walked into the cafe the next morning, I expected some texts. Maybe one or two awkward voicemails. I did not expect the standing ovation I got from the corner table. Here she is, Lee called, waving both arms like she was hailing a cab. Rachel was already mid-sip of her latte, grinning like a cat in sunlight. 3 other cousins, Trish's son Alex, Uncle Mitch's daughter Natalie, and even quiet Donna from Vermont were crowded around a laptop and several phones. I raised an eyebrow. Did someone die? I joked, shedding my coat. Yeah, Rachel said, gesturing dramatically. The old family order. Lee spun her phone around. You haven't seen the group chat. I blinked. I left it months ago. Well, she said, you've gone viral in it. Natalie snorted. Aunt Marilyn sent a 500-word essay last night about how public humiliation is the worst kind of cruelty and then misspelled your name in all caps. Donna chimed in. She called you entitled but used the wrong form of your, twice. I should have been angry, but I wasn't. I was just tired and a little amused. And the rest of the family? I asked cautiously. Rachel slid a croissant across the table. You're not gonna believe this. Lee held up her phone. Mom, Aunt Brenda jumped in, told Marilyn she was out of line, said what you did took more grace than anyone else in that room. My breath caught. Brenda, she dragged them, Rachel confirmed, eyebrows raised. Called them manipulators. Said Marilyn's toast was a guilt trip wrapped in fake praise. She said, Lee added, scrolling for the quote, it's time we stop expecting Emily to bankroll our dysfunction. I didn't know what hit me harder, the relief or the weight of all the years I'd waited to hear someone in that generation say the truth out loud. She stood up for me, I said softly, almost to myself. Rachel nodded. And everyone else followed. Mitch, Trish, even that weird cousin from Tampa who never talks. He just sent a gif of someone slow clapping. I sat down slowly, letting it settle. It wasn't just about a bill or a party. It was the beginning of the end, until 2 days later when it got worse. And somehow better. A manila envelope arrived at my door with a certified mail sticker, notice of civil complaint, filed by Marilyn and Roger Sharp, alleging emotional distress, public defamation, and humiliation in front of minors. They were suing me for hurting their feelings. Rachel found me pacing in my living room, envelope in hand, staring like it might catch fire. "This is unhinged," I muttered. "Oh, they've snapped," she said, plucking the document from my hand. "It's performative, Em. They want you to crawl back and beg them to drop it." "I'm not crawling." "You're damn right you're not." At the hearing a month later, Aunt Brenda showed up in a navy pantsuit and spoke so calmly, so clearly, the judge stopped taking notes just to listen. "Emily didn't embarrass them," she said. "They embarrassed themselves, and when the spotlight finally turned around, they couldn't handle the view." The case was thrown out within minutes. The judge fined my parents for filing a false claim. They left the courtroom in silence, and I left with Brenda's hand on my shoulder. "You stood up," she said, "and they crumbled." The courthouse steps were wide and cold beneath my heels, but for the first time in years I didn't feel small walking down them. No reporters. No grand crowd. Just me, my lawyer in his perfectly creased suit, and Aunt Brenda, heels clicking confidently beside me, handbag swinging like she'd just finished a morning errand, not testified against her own sister. The December wind swept down the street, tugging at my coat, but I barely noticed. I was still absorbing the judge's final words, soft yet definitive. Claim dismissed, fined for filing a baseless suit. A stamp, a sigh, a truth settled. My lawyer gave me a polite smile, handed over the final paperwork and said, "They won't try again, not after that." He left me standing with Brenda near the parking lot. The air was crisp, full of something that felt suspiciously like peace. "You did it," Brenda said simply. I looked at her. "I almost didn't." She raised an eyebrow. "But you did." There was a long silence between us, but not the kind filled with tension. It was the quiet that happens when two people understand each other without needing to name every bruise. Then she gently patted my arm. "Now everyone knows the truth, honey. You stood up and they crumbled." I let that sink in. Not everyone had shown up for the drama, but everyone had read the fallout. The group chat had gone eerily quiet after the court ruling. Ashley apparently tried to spin the narrative online, something vague and self-pitying, but no one bit. Not this time. The cousins knew. The aunts and uncles knew, and most importantly, I knew I wasn't crazy, I knew I wasn't selfish, I knew that walking away wasn't weakness, it was survival. Brenda walked me to my car. Before I got in, she placed something small into my hand, a keychain shaped like a wolf, silver, smooth, heavy for its size. "You're not the black sheep, Em," she said. "You're the one that left the pen." I felt my throat tight. "Thank you for showing up," she smiled. Some of us were just waiting for someone to lead the way. After she left, I sat in my car for a long time, holding that keychain in my hand, remembering all the years I tried to twist myself into the version of a daughter they wanted. Quiet, generous, unquestioning, but that girl was gone. The one who replaced her didn't beg for peace anymore, she chose it. And now it was finally mine. I drove home without music, letting the silence wrap around me like a well-earned blanket. The kind that doesn't weigh heavy, but settles gently on your shoulders. No more pretending. No more hoping for the apology that would never come. No more shrinking so someone else could shine. 1 year later, I lit my own birthday candles in the backyard. No fancy servers, no guest list long enough to need a spreadsheet. Just a folding table draped in mismatched linens, string lights twinkling above us like we were under stars of our own design, and laughter rising like music from the people who had actually earned their seat. Rachel had baked the cake herself. An uneven, glorious 3-layer lemon thing with too much frosting and edible flowers that kept sliding off. "Don't judge the wobble," she warned as she carried it out. "It's structurally chaotic but emotionally stable like all of us." Everyone laughed. Even Brenda, sipping her iced tea with that knowing smile she always wore now. Lee brought homemade spanakopita. Natalie made cocktails in mason jars labeled with each person's name. No one brought anything expensive, and yet the night felt richer than any I'd had before. I wasn't performing anymore. I wasn't hosting out of guilt or expectation. I was just there. With them, present. And that was enough. When the singing ended and the wind blew out two of the candles before I had a chance, I just shrugged. Guess I get two automatic wishes. Lee grinned. You better make 'em good. I looked around at the string lights reflecting in familiar eyes, Rachel's playful wink, Brenda's warm gaze, the cousins who had chosen me even when it was inconvenient to do so, and I realized I didn't need wishes. I already had everything I used to hope for. I picked up my glass and stood slowly, just enough to quiet the table. I just want to say, I paused, glancing down at the drink, then back up. This is what family looks like now. People who show up because they want to, not because they expect something, not because they're trying to control the narrative or drain the bank account. Rachel smirked.